First of all, I'll begin by asking you, of course, we just saw the post of President Trump where he has announced a 5 day pause on strikes against Iranian infrastructure. Do you see this as a genuine diplomatic opening, and do you see this as a sign of de escalation?
Uh, it could be the latter in terms of de escalation, but only perhaps for a brief window. The lull in question that has been proposed by Mr. Trump must be foregrounded against this fact that Iranian Foreign Minister Arabchi only a week or so ago was bluntly declaring that we are incommunicado with Washington and clearly had nothing to do with them since the war started on 28th February. But that is not true. A tacit channel of communication between him and Steve Witkoff did open last week for the first time. You could call it back channel talks. So there was some communication going on between Tehran and DC. And perhaps this would explain why President Trump has gone ahead and announced it. The lull in question for 5 days. And it's not a full fledged formal ceasefire. That needs to be stated too. So that's one thing. And also, it is good to pause even during a military campaign because it gives you time to take stock of the situation of a very fast evolving scenario playing out and to check your arsenal logistics and what your tactics can be. So a pause in itself is something which planners always do welcome.
Mhm. Burzin, just days ago, I mean, even it was in fact yesterday only, the US issued a 48-hour ultimatum over the Strait of Hormuz. How do you interpret this rapid shift from coercion to pause? Is this strategic signaling or a policy inconsistency? I mean, how do you look at it?
Well, the only thing consistent is that Mr. Trump can be unpredictable. That is something which all Middle Easterners know, not just the Iranians, but even his GCC allies. Perhaps something could have been factored in. You see, it's paradoxical, but how do I explain it? The Arabs, GCC partners, are asking Mr. Trump to finish the job with Iran because they cannot afford to have him just hastily pull out, leaving things as they are because a wounded Iran is a greater risk to their medium and long term stability and threat. And they are already at the receiving end of Iran just now. So you can imagine what it would be subsequently if an exit strategy were hastily devised and Trump exited from the scene. So on one level, you have the GCC allies pressing him to continue despite domestic opposition and opposition from his European allies who are reticent to join the NATO allies in question. But at the same time, perhaps he may have factored this in as part of his strategy because Tehran threatened to obliterate desalinization plants across the Middle East. Not just the oil installations, which already they have done, as you can tell. And for example, Qatar's Ras Laffan field, at a conservative estimate, would take about a good 3 to 5 years to resume following repairs. So that partly that has been factored in, but the question is, I think it was the water salinization plants that could have partly led him, I repeat, only partly to stay his hand for a moment. But it isn't over. So we have to see what happens after the 5 day hiatus concludes.
Mhm. And do you also think that a back channel diplomacy through actors like Oman or Qatar still play a decisive role because they were attacked as well? I mean, Qatar, just as you mentioned, they were attacked too. And do you see this 5 day pause translating into a structured negotiation process, or is it just a tactical breather?
I think the tactical breather is a good way of putting it. Communications are going on on both sides of the Persian Gulf. Um, the embassy, Tehran's missions are still open in all GCC capitals, though certain personnel, intelligence and military personnel, have been declared personae non grata and been asked to evict within 24 to 48 hours. Doha has done that, for example, and so had Abu Dhabi a while ago. Um, talks between Muscat and Tehran on a bilateral basis continue, and I'm sure Muscat must be left wondering as to why it has incurred Tehran's wrath, given that it was the closest of all Arab allies, GCC allies, to Tehran over the years. Um, at the same time, there are unconfirmed reports that have been circulating, and I repeat, unconfirmed, that Qatar offered Tehran $6 billion with immediate effect to stop firing at it. Not the other GCC, but just at the state of Qatar. Uh, but like I mentioned, it was unconfirmed. The funds in question go back to the prisoner stake funds that had been placed in effect for prisoner swaps with the US for citizens, and with heavy US oversight, of course, over the funds, which are based in Doha. But the corpus of funds has not been dispersed to Tehran so far. And Qatar, tantalizingly, it is reported, put that out to Tehran. But obviously, that's all we can say at present.
Yeah, Burjan, just last question. What are the most plausible scenarios over the next few weeks? Negotiated pause, wider regional war, or prolonged low intensity conflict? And also, how do you look at the position of Israel? I mean, we have seen a statement from Trump, but we still await a statement from Netanyahu as well. So, where do you see Israel's position?
Well, strangely enough, Israel's position concurs with that of the GCC allies in seeing the job done and finished. Israel makes no bones about the fact that it wants this regime to be completely obliterated. And I do believe the GCC allies are now increasingly realizing that too, that they simply cannot live in the shadow of a Tehran like this. The Third Republic has already started with Mojtaba Khamenei. But there are questions that need to be asked of what next. There might be some land warfare involved. How it would pan out depends on what support is afforded, say, to Kurdish dissidents in Western Iran, who have not necessarily been inspired by previous US administrations. They would want copper bottomed guarantees to see how they could pursue their next steps. So that would be one option. And even Netanyahu himself conceded that despite decapacitating so many top brass individuals, you can't bring regime change simply from the air. It has to be done on ground. And for that to happen, you need some kinetic action terrestrially, not just aerially. And also, Israel must realize that its stunning, brilliant campaign of taking out these hardliners and other elements of the state, symbolic as well as potent symbols, not just Khamenei symbolically, but even IRGC and intelligence commanders and the like, that is good as a strategy, but it doesn't necessarily translate into long term policy. So even Israel must privately concede that they need something beyond that, for the morning after, so to speak.